Breaking, and I mean grab your popcorn breaking. The courtroom was supposed to be silent, but guess who walked in like a plot twist straight out of a Bet special? Jasmine. Yes, that Jasmine. The one social media swore had vanished after the Babygate fiasco of 2023. But, oh no. Fam, she didn't come to sit quietly. She came to detonate because when Rasheeda showed up to finalize her divorce from the self-proclaimed CEO of chaos himself, Jasmine stormed in like the ghost of scandals past, clutching receipts thicker than a W-2 folder. You could practically hear the Wi-Fi connection breaking under the weight of the drama. Now the real question is, what was on those papers? A secret baby? Hidden accounts? Maybe a mixtape contract forged in betrayal? Stay tuned, because this isn't just gossip. This is the trial that broke the timeline. Was Jasmine here for revenge or redemption? Either way, somebody's empire just crumbled. And we've got the exclusive tea. The morning air around the courthouse was thick with humidity and gossip. A strange mixture of perfume, nerves, and the faint click of camera shutters echoing through the marble halls as reporters camped outside like vultures waiting for a fresh headline. Inside, Rasheeda sat perfectly still, poised in a white tailored suit that reflected calm power. Her face carved into the expression of someone who had been through too many storms to flinch at thunder. The judge shuffled papers in a rhythm that felt almost rehearsed, the hum of legal proceedings blending into the low murmur of the curious crowd gathered in the back. It was supposed to be a quiet hearing, the final chapter of a long and public saga. A simple signature that would close years of emotional chaos. But fate, or perhaps pure drama, had other plans. Just as the clerk began reading the docket number, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom opened with a sound that silenced everything. Heels clicked on polished marble, and in that instant, all eyes turned to the figure walking in with unshakable confidence. It was Jasmine, the name that had once set the internet ablaze. The woman at the heart of whispers, scandals, and headlines that refused to fade. She didn't sneak in or hesitate. She strode forward with a measured grace, the kind of entrance that says, "I came to be seen." In her right hand, she carried a thick envelope. The edges creased as if it had been held tightly for hours, guarded like a weapon of truth. Her expression was calm but burning beneath the surface. Eyes locked on Rasheeda, who remained perfectly still except for a slight tilt of the head that betrayed a mixture of shock and irritation. The murmurs started immediately. Soft gasps, whispered names. Phones being raised subtly by those hoping to capture the moment that would dominate every gossip blog within the hour. Jasmine stopped before the bench and spoke, her voice even, confident, almost theatrical. "Your Honor, I have evidence that this court needs to see." The room froze. The judge glanced at the bailiff. The bailiff glanced at the clerk. And Rasheeda's lawyer straightened his tie in quiet disbelief. Kirk, sitting 2 rows behind his Suntobe ex-wife, shifted uneasily in his chair, his face tightening like someone who already knew what was coming. The judge asked her to explain, but Jasmine didn't rush. She walked closer to the front, placed the envelope gently on the table, and said, "This isn't just about betrayal or love gone wrong. It's about money, deception, and the kind of secrets that don't stay buried." A sharp intake of breath filled the room as Rasheeda's lawyer leaned forward and asked for clarification. Jasmine opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, pulling out a stack of documents and laid them one by one on the table. Bank statements, wire transfers, business names that looked familiar to anyone who had followed the couple's ventures. But what stood out were the amounts, columns of digits that didn't add up to anything innocent. Millions, maybe more. Transferred to accounts under shell companies with names that sounded ordinary enough to hide in plain sight. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Kirk's face turned pale, his hand covering his mouth. Rasheeda's calm exterior cracked for just a moment, the tiniest flicker of disbelief crossing her face before she quickly regained control. Jasmine looked at her directly, her tone icy but steady. "You deserve to know where your empire's money really went," she said. The judge called for order, but the room had already descended into a quiet frenzy. One of the reporters sitting in the back row muttered something about offshore accounts. Another whispered the word fraud under his breath. Kirk tried to speak, but the words stumbled out as if his throat had forgotten how to form sentences. Jasmine continued, explaining that for years there had been transactions tied to companies that didn't exist. Invoices for services never rendered, and phantom employees who mysteriously collected salaries. Each document she presented added weight to the silence pressing against the walls. Then she did something no one expected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black flash drive, holding it between her fingers like a key to a locked truth. "There's a video," she said. "You'll want to see this." The judge sighed, clearly exasperated but curious. "Miss Jasmine, this is a courtroom, not a television studio," he said. Her reply came instantly, a sharp edge hidden behind calm composure. "Maybe it should be, because the truth deserves an audience." Without waiting for permission, she handed the flash drive to the clerk, who reluctantly inserted it into the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered to life, grainy footage filling the display. Laughter, voices, the unmistakable image of Kirk sitting at a lavish dinner table, boasting to a group of men about untaxed profits, secret accounts, and women who know their place. The audio was muffled but clear enough to draw gasps from every corner of the room. Rasheeda's face turned to stone, every ounce of emotion vanishing behind the cool mask of restraint she had perfected over years of public scrutiny. Kirk's lawyer whispered frantically, trying to stop the playback. But it was too late. The damage was done. Jasmine watched silently, her eyes never leaving Kirk's face, as the room absorbed the weight of what they were seeing. When the clip ended, the judge immediately called for order again. Voice raised above the chaos, but the tension could not be reined in. Rasheeda finally stood, slow and deliberate, her voice steady when she spoke. "Is this how you built everything?" she asked, not to the judge, not to the crowd, but directly to Kirk. He tried to answer, but the words died on his tongue. Jasmine gathered the papers back into a neat pile, her movements calm, almost graceful, as if the storm around her didn't exist. Then, just as she was about to sit down, she reached into her purse again and pulled out a smaller envelope, sealed in red wax. The initials R and K pressed into it. The judge frowned, already weary of surprises. "Another document?" he asked. Jasmine looked up, her gaze unwavering. "Not a document," she said. "A confession." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Rasheeda's lawyer leaned forward. Kirk sank back into his chair, his face drained of color. Jasmine broke the seal, unfolded the letter inside, and began to read. Her voice trembled only slightly at first, then steadied as the words spilled out, each one slicing through the air like truth finally finding its voice. "Dear Rasheeda," it began, "if you're hearing this, it means I ran out of lies before I ran out of excuses." The room was completely still. No one breathed. Every word that followed felt heavier than the last. A mixture of guilt, apology, and admission that blurred the line between personal failure and criminal deceit. It spoke of falsified records, manipulated contracts, and marketing budgets that were little more than cover for gifts, trips, and favors. When Jasmine finished reading, she folded the letter neatly, placed it beside the documents, and looked at the judge. "That's all I have," she said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. The judge finally spoke, his voice heavy and low. "This hearing is adjourned until further review." But the hearing was no longer the story. The real story was already out of the courthouse, spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Outside, the crowd pressed forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing, microphones raised, but Jasmine didn't stop to answer. She just walked out into the blinding light, the door swinging closed behind her as if sealing the end of one truth and the beginning of another. When Jasmine stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd exploded into a storm of flashing lights and shouted questions. The noise so thick it almost drowned out the sound of her own heartbeat. Reporters surged forward like a tide, and cameras were thrust inches from her face while voices barked for answers that she had no intention of giving. She kept walking, eyes forward, her expression unreadable. The small red-sealed envelope still in her hand, as if it were both a weapon and a shield. Behind her, the courthouse doors closed, but inside, the chaos continued. Rasheeda remained seated at the plaintiff's table, motionless for a long moment, staring at the stack of papers that had just detonated her life in front of a crowd. Kirk sat slumped on the other side, his lawyer whispering frantically while the judge rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Outside the courthouse, within minutes, the internet had already taken the story and spun it into 1,000 directions. Clips from the courtroom were appearing online before the session was even officially adjourned. A grainy Tensicon video of Jasmine handing over the flash drive was circulating under the caption, "The moment that ended Kirk's career." News vans were arriving from every local network. Influencers were live streaming from the sidewalk, narrating each second as though they were witnesses to the end of civilization. People who had never cared about Rasheeda or Kirk before suddenly had opinions, theories, and fake insider information. The public loved a scandal, and this one had all the ingredients of a binge-worthy spectacle. But inside that whirlwind of digital noise, something quieter was unfolding. A team of forensic accountants, tipped off by the documents Jasmine had revealed, were already running searches through public databases. Within hours, they began noticing patterns, small anomalies in corporate filings that matched the names of the companies she had mentioned. Bluestone, Silent Echo, Horizon Projects, each of them connected to other shell entities in different states. What had started as a messy divorce was beginning to look like the front page of a financial investigation. By late afternoon, the courthouse itself had become the epicenter of speculation. Anonymous sources claiming to be close to the case told reporters that subpoenas were already being drafted. Commentators on television debated whether Jasmine's evidence would hold up in court. Some suggested she had faked everything to seek revenge. Others believed she had uncovered the kind of scandal that could topple reputations and careers. The truth sat somewhere between those extremes, but no one cared about truth anymore. What mattered was the spectacle, the way people felt while watching it. Meanwhile, Rasheeda had retreated to a waiting car surrounded by her security team. Inside the tinted vehicle, she said nothing. Her assistant tried to speak but stopped when Rasheeda raised a hand. The lawyer sat beside her, flipping through a copy of the documents Jasmine had presented. "These accounts," he said quietly, "if they're real, this could become criminal." Not just for Kirk. Rasheeda turned her gaze to the window, her reflection looking back at her like a stranger. "I built everything with him," she said softly, "and now I have to prove I didn't build it on lies." Her voice didn't shake, but there was an edge of something else in etched resolve. While the city obsessed over the courtroom drama, she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Somewhere across town, Jasmine was sitting in a quiet cafe, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages, calls, and notifications. She ignored them all, staring instead at the cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly, though whether from relief or fear even, she didn't know. What she had done couldn't be undone. She had dropped a bomb that would keep exploding for weeks. A television in the corner played a news segment about the case. The anchor spoke her name with that rehearsed tone of seriousness reserved for scandals that drive ratings. Jasmine watched for a moment, then turned away. She had told herself that exposing Kirk was justice, but now that it was done, the noise felt unbearable. People she had never met were calling her both hero and villain. She wanted silence, but silence no longer existed. Across social media, hashtags were multiplying, debates raging, old videos resurfacing. Every clip from the couple's reality show was being re-examined as if it contained hidden clues. A rumor started that the letter she had read was part of a larger confession. Another claimed that she and Rasheeda had planned it together. Conspiracy piled upon conspiracy until no one could tell what was real anymore. Late in the evening, when the courthouse finally emptied, Kirk stepped outside to a wall of cameras. He didn't speak at first, just squinted into the flash of lights, the exhaustion etched deep into his face. Reporters shouted his name, asking if the allegations were true. One asked if he intended to resign from his company. Another shouted, "Do you deny the offshore accounts?" Kirk opened his mouth, started to say something, then closed it again. The silence was answer enough. He pushed past the crowd and disappeared into his car, leaving behind a wave of shouting voices and camera flashes that followed like angry insects. Inside the vehicle, he exhaled slowly, staring out the window as the city blurred past. He knew the narrative was no longer his to control. Whatever he said now would sound like damage control. Somewhere, someone was already editing together a montage of his rise and fall, complete with dramatic music. In the distance, sirens wailed, not for him, but for the chaos he had helped create. By nightfall, the courthouse steps were empty, but the story refused to die. News outlets announced that federal investigators were now reviewing financial records linked to the couple's business empire. Anonymous officials claimed there were discrepancies spanning years. Commentators debated whether Jasmine's evidence would spark a chain reaction of lawsuits. It was no longer a divorce story. It had become a scandal with economic implications. In living rooms across the country, people were glued to screens, watching as anchors dissected every frame of the courtroom footage. Experts speculated about what might come next. Would Rasheeda press criminal charges? Would Kirk's company collapse? Would Jasmine face backlash for her revelation? Each theory fueled another, and the story kept feeding on itself. In the middle of that frenzy, Rasheeda sat alone in her home office, surrounded by silence. The documents were spread across her desk, the red-sealed envelope lying open beside her. The letter had been copied and shared 1,000 times. But the original was still here, the ink slightly smudged where Jasmine's fingers had held it. Rasheeda reread it slowly, her face unreadable, and then placed it back in its envelope. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and waited for the voice on the other end. "It's time," she said quietly. "We're not waiting for the investigators. We find everything ourselves." Her tone was calm, certain, the kind of certainty that comes only after everything else has been stripped away. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning, that what had started in that courtroom was going to reach far beyond her marriage, her business, or even her reputation. The truth had been set loose, and once truth starts running, nothing can stop it. Truth starts running, nothing can stop it. Night settled over the city like a heavy curtain. But the lights never dimmed in the offices of lawyers, journalists, and investigators who were now feeding on the story that refused to sleep. Rasheeda sat at her desk, staring at a wall of files that had been quietly delivered to her home hours earlier. Her assistant had managed to pull bank logs and archived contracts from old servers that the company had thought forgotten. Each page told the same story that Jasmine had hinted at in court. Trails of money leading nowhere, projects billed but never completed. Transfers looping through foreign accounts before disappearing completely. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until the room itself seemed smaller. She had spent years defending the empire she built with Kirk, convincing herself that his charm and confidence meant he knew what he was doing. Now all that remained was the realization that she had been fighting for an illusion. She reached for her phone and called her attorney again. His voice came through, tired but alert, as if he too had given up on sleep. "We need to be ahead of this," she said. "If investigators are coming, I want them to find me ready." He promised to start preparing a statement by morning. After she hung up, she looked once more at the letter Jasmine had read aloud. The ink had started to fade where the paper had been folded, and she found herself wondering how long Jasmine had held it before revealing it to the world. There was anger, yes, but there was also a strange gratitude. Without that moment, Rasheeda might have never known the full scale of what had been done behind her back. The truth burned, but it also freed. Across the city, Kirk sat alone in a penthouse that now felt like a cage. His phone lay face down on the table, still vibrating every few minutes with calls from reporters, friends, and investors desperate for answers. Every headline that appeared online made him flinch. Some painted him as a villain, others as a fallen genius. None of them were entirely wrong. He poured himself another drink, staring at the skyline through the glass. the lights of the city blurring into a smear of gold and white. In the reflection, he could see himself older than he remembered, the confident smirk gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Somewhere between the lies and the luxury, he had lost the part of himself that cared about what was real. Now all that remained was the echo of what he used to be. His lawyer had told him to stay silent, to wait, to let the storm pass. But he knew storms like this never just passed. They left wreckage behind. Meanwhile, Jasmine was nowhere to be found. Reporters had tried tracking her down all day, but every lead led to a dead end. Some claimed she had left the city. Others insisted she was still nearby, hiding until the chaos settled. What few people knew was that she had driven to the outskirts of town, to a quiet motel off the highway where no one recognized her. She sat on the bed with the television off, the glow from a single lamp washing over her face. Her phone was still buzzing, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. The world had turned her into a symbol, but symbols have no peace. She had thought revealing the truth would feel like victory, but now it only felt like exhaustion. Yet deep down, she also knew this wasn't over. There was more buried beneath the surface, things even she hadn't revealed yet. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let it all collapse on its own. But another part whispered that the story wasn't finished until every secret had been unearthed. The next morning arrived gray and cold, clouds heavy over the courthouse steps, where a swarm of reporters waited again. News had broken overnight that financial regulators were opening an official inquiry into Kirk's company. Several business partners had quietly cut ties, and one of his closest associates had been seen leaving a federal office building just before dawn. The narrative was shifting fast. What had begun as a scandal of infidelity was now transforming into something far more dangerous, a potential criminal case. Rasheeda arrived just after sunrise, escorted by her lawyer and a small team of assistants carrying files. She looked composed, but there was a quiet steel in her eyes. When reporters shouted questions, she ignored them, walking straight through the crowd into the building where investigators were waiting. Inside, she handed over everything she had found, every document, every digital trail. For the first time in years, she felt the strange calm of someone who had stopped pretending. While she met with officials, Kirk's car pulled up outside the same courthouse. The crowd turned on him instantly, cameras flashing, voices overlapping as he pushed his way through. His lawyer followed close behind, whispering instructions that Kirk barely heard. Once inside, he was met with silence from those who had once greeted him with admiration. His empire had started crumbling overnight. One of his major investors had frozen accounts, and the studio that carried his name had quietly removed him from their executive page. Every handshake and smile he had once depended on was now gone. The judge reconvened the hearing briefly that afternoon, only to confirm that further proceedings would be delayed pending the ongoing investigation. When Kirk and Rasheeda were both called forward, they stood only a few feet apart, but felt separated by entire worlds. She didn't look at him, and he didn't dare meet her eyes. The tension in the room was so sharp it seemed to hum. Then the judge dismissed them, and just like that, the room emptied again, leaving behind the ghost of everything that had been said. Outside, the sky had turned the color of lead. Reporters swarmed once more, but Rasheeda didn't stop this time. She walked directly to her car, her lawyer trailing behind. As the door closed and the driver pulled away, she finally allowed herself to exhale. She didn't feel victorious or vindicated. She felt tired, but that fatigue was laced with purpose. The world could interpret this however it wanted, but she knew what mattered now was rebuilding. Reclaiming her name from the mess others had dragged it through. Back at the motel, Jasmine sat by the window watching the news coverage. She saw footage of Rasheeda leaving the courthouse and turned the volume down. She didn't need to hear the commentary to understand what was happening. The truth had finally taken root. She reached into her bag and pulled out a second flash drive, one she hadn't mentioned in court, containing the rest of the files she had collected over the years. She looked at it for a long time, knowing she could release it and end everything for good. But she also knew that every revelation came with a price, and she had already paid more than most people would ever understand. As the rain began to fall outside, she placed the flash drive on the bedside table and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the city, phones were ringing, lawyers were drafting statements, and the story was growing beyond her control. Maybe it always had been. But as the thunder rolled and the headlines multiplied, Jasmine closed her eyes and whispered the only truth that still mattered. Secrets can ruin people, but sometimes exposing them ruins you too. So what happens next? Will the investigation bring the truth fully into the light, or will the powerful find a way to bury it all again? Will Rasheeda rebuild her empire stronger than before, or will the shadows of deception keep haunting everyone involved? And what about Jasmine, the unexpected catalyst who turned a courtroom into a battlefield? Was she a hero seeking justice, or just another player in a much bigger game? The story isn't finished, and you know this saga is far from over. Somewhere behind the headlines, more secrets are waiting, and every secret eventually finds a voice. If you've been following this roller coaster from the beginning, you already know that each twist comes with another shock, and the next chapter might just change everything. So don't scroll past it. Stay tuned, because the truth is getting louder and the fallout is only beginning. Hit that subscribe button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what you think really happened behind those courtroom doors. Was it justice, revenge, or something even darker? Keep your eyes open, because the next revelation could break before the world is ready to believe it.